What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Ari Teaches Drums, where I will be teaching you all facets and fundamentals of drumming. You probably clicked on this video because you are interested in improving your flam quality, and that is excellent because flams are such an essential part of drumming and being a percussionist. So let's get into breaking down how to play clean and consistent flams. In my fundamentals series here, so far we've covered grip, legato strokes, downstrokes, upstrokes, buzz rolls, and double strokes, all of which are absolutely foundational to becoming a strong drummer and percussionist. So feel free to go back and watch those videos on my channel as well. All right, so what is a flam? I like to think of a flam as a beefy note. We place a grace note before that primary note. So it's essentially going to be two separate strokes. The grace note is played very softly at about piano or even pianissimo. And so that's just going to be a small, tiny rotation of the wrist. You barely even need to rotate your wrist to play this note. And you definitely should not be lifting your arm. And this applies to both matched and traditional grip. You basically don't even need to rotate. Start at your set position and let the stick go downward and strike the drum. That's going to be your grace note. Immediately after the grace note, we have the primary note, which is always the strongest of the two notes. So if we put the two together, we get something like this. And in slow motion, that's essentially a small grace note and then a louder note. Now, even if I'm playing at like mezzo piano dynamic or piano, the primary note is still going to be the louder of the two. So something like this. Some common misconceptions that I want to throw at you right out the gate here is a flam is not a flat double stop, what we would call a double stop like this. That's when two notes are played at the same exact time on both hands. We do not want that. We want the grace note, like I said, to occur before the primary note. Another common misconception is that the grace note is not a buzz. The grace note is not a buzz, so we're not doing this. This is something we can do, but we would not call that a flam. We'd call that like a buzzed flam, where we buzz the grace note. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to press down like a buzz stroke like we've covered before. Keep this goal in your head. The grace note and the primary note should have consistent spacing and balance. So what do I mean by that? My first biggest key is dynamic awareness. So you want to become aware of how loud each note is. I've already said this, but I want to really hammer this home. The grace note, it's got to be low and soft, only about 1 or 2 inches above the drum head. So you don't want to start coming up into the 3, 4, 5 inch range above the drum head. That's going to start to be too loud. There actually is a thing called FLAMS, which shows up in drum set playing more often, where you kind of do a flam, but both notes are the same volume or so. That is not what we're going for with a flam, hence the word blam, which I think the B kind of means both the same volume. That's not what we're going for with the traditional flam. So with a flam, keep that grace note super duper low. And like I said, essentially don't even rotate your wrist. There may be a small, tiny rotation, but you don't want to start getting into this zone where you're really doing a full rotation. So if you are rotating your wrist a little bit, it's got to be very, very small. All right, and then the primary stroke, which is when the rhythm occurs. So the grace note, it occurs before the rhythm occurs. So if I'm playing straight quarter notes with the metronome like this, I want the primary note to line up with the beats. So here's my primary note. And then I'm going to place the grace note a little bit before the beat occurs. A common mistake is that young players play the grace note on the beat, and then what happens is that the primary note then sounds late. So that's not what we really want. The grace note is more like a lead-in to the beat. So my next key for clean and consistent flams is spacing awareness. How far apart should the grace note be from the primary note? right? Should it be really spaced out like this? Or should it be closer together, something like this? Well, in general, I suggest you go for a Goldilocks zone, so to speak. So you don't want to go for something that's too far apart, and you also don't want a flam that's too close together, because then it can risk turning into a double stop, which we said earlier already is not our goal with flams. So the idea is that we want our two notes to be close enough to where it sounds like one unified note with some depth, or in other words, one beefy note. A distinction I do want to make here is that the marching percussion approach tends to be a little more close together. And again, that's because we have usually multiple players playing flams at the same time. If it's too open and loose of an approach across the whole line, it's going to tend to sound less clean. So in a marching setting, you may want to bring your grace note and primary note a little closer together. Now, the other side of that coin is in symphonic percussion playing, we're going to tend to have a more open approach where we want to clearly hear that a flam's happening. And that usually is because you tend to be usually maybe the only player playing, for example, a snare drum part with an orchestra or a band, and we want to hear those flams come out. So keep the spacing a little more open like this. I hope you can hear the difference between example A and B that I just showed you, where in example B, I'm really just listening for that space to be a little more further apart. Before I get into some exercises for building consistent and even flam quality, let's talk about some crucial tips for better flams. Use a mirror or a camera and watch yourself play. This is going to be such an important way to see if you're achieving that dynamic element of keeping that grace note soft and low compared to the primary note, and then also listening back to yourself. Listen in real time, of course, listen to the sound that's happening, but record yourself and watch back your performance to see what could you adjust, what went well, what do you need to improve on, and adjust from there. Another general guideline for you is stay as relaxed as you can. I've said it basically every video, guys. Tension is the enemy. You don't want to be tense as you're playing. That's going to tend to be a recipe for disaster in our percussion playing. Another thing is rebound awareness. You want to be aware of what your hands are doing and how they're moving, how they're adjusting to your instrument. You want to constantly be aware of the rebound. Use your sticks and the natural rebound of the drum to work for you, not against you. Another key guideline is begin slowly, guys. When you're working on flams, don't start rushing into, right? Playing quick flams, that's a quick way to not master flams well. You want to master them very slowly and just listen for the quality of your flams one at a time and analyze each one at a time. Another thing that's really important is use a metronome as you practice always. I'm about to show you some exercises now where I'm going to use my metronome, and I would show you how I'm going to use it to help me. The first exercise that I'm going to cover here is called the flam spacing exercise. All you're going to do is play flams very slowly and start with a very open approach to your grace notes and slowly close the gap up. So here's what I'm talking about. I'll show you first without a metronome, and then I'll show you with a metronome. So start with something like this. Really open, and then gradually close the space. One more time so you can hear what I was doing. Starting super open and gradually closing the space from where the grace note starts to where the primary note occurs. And practice that several times, and you can also practice it in the reverse, but that way you just start to calibrate what it feels like to place that grace note at the time you're desiring to place the grace note. At the end of the day, you want to be able to control what you do with your hands. So it takes practicing multiple times and repeating that practice to where you can replicate whatever flam approach you're trying to do consistently. And doing the extreme of having it super open is a great way to start, especially if you're struggling with usually playing double stops. Then really just overcorrect, have a super open grace note, and practice flams like that for a while until you gradually learn to close up the space, but still have that good beefy quality of a good solid flam. So now I'm gonna practice that exercise with a metronome. 60 beats per minute with an 8th note subdivision on. So something like this. And by the end of that, you might have heard I was basically just about at a double stop sound is what I was trying to do. All right, next exercise is a classic. It's 8 on a hand, but we're gonna play every single notes as a flam. So the great thing about this is that it's gonna isolate not only right hand flams, but a lot of times, especially in marching percussion, we're gonna need to know how to play left hand flams. So we need to be consistent with our flam approach on the right hand as the primary note, as well as when the left hand becomes the primary notes. All the flams I've been playing so far in the video, my left hand has been the grace note and my right hand has been the primary note. But that's gonna switch once I go to the left hand. The grace note is now gonna be the right hand, and then the left hand is that primary note. Here's 8 on a hand flams. 1, 2, ready, go. One more time. Now, I wasn't 100% consistent, and this is such a great exercise because you basically have 8 chances to try to play your flams the exact same way every single time. So this is where I would be listening for, oh, how is that going for me? What can I do to adjust? And again, consistency is key. So I'm trying to play the same exact approach every single time. That's a really good rule of thumb for us to gradually start building consistency into our playing. All right, and then I would definitely speed that up. So I was at 60 beats per minute. Now let's try something like 80 beats per minute. All right, so that's the idea, and I'm telling you guys, just a simple exercise like 8 on a hand, trying to play consistent flams on each hand is gonna be a huge builder for you. My last exercise for you guys would be to just start applying flams to common rudiments out there. So for example, Flam Accents, where we might have this pattern, and start really slow with just getting the motion of and you gradually speed that up, and then also break down what each hand is individually doing. Essentially, the right hand is playing this, and then the left hand is playing, and you put it together, you get this. You've got other rudiments like Swiss Army triplets. And this is essentially where you have flam, right, and then a low left, and then a flam again. And you can also practice these on both hands, because there's right hand Swiss Armies like this. and then you could also play it off the left. One of the most well-known rudiments is paradiddles. You can place a flam on the start of each paradiddle like so. Alright guys, thank you so much for joining me yet again for another episode of Ari Teaches Drums. I hope you found some value in this video. If you did, please like, drop a comment below, and subscribe for future videos about drumming. Hope you stay well out there. Ari Schiller out.